This is the Open University.
Happy New Year and welcome back. This is the Open University, and this is one of these programs where I have literally no idea what I'm going to talk about until I talk about it. This is my new place. It's very dark today. It's very windy. There's a huge storm over the UK, which is affecting us here as well. The shutters were rattling. We're in an area here called Combat, which means combat. I've been coming up to the cafes here for in fact, I've been coming up to this area, for a long time. I wrote one of my songs, a song called Ex Erotoman, on the steps of a doorway on a street which is just south of Jourdain Metro. And I remember just being really charmed by the area. I must have been in Paris just on a passing visit. I used to live here in the 90s, of course, mostly in Montmartre. And I would come back and nostalgically visit my old haunts in Montmartre. But I was up here, I guess I must just have walked up through the sort of Chinese area. Suddenly, on the street, had this inspiration for this song, which is a very Gainsbourgian song. He would have loved the linguistic wordplay around ex-scopophile, ex-coprophile, ex-blue rider, whatever it is, Colossus Bestrider. But I made a video, I think when I lived in Osaka, which was featuring Tove Jansson and her lesbian woman friend on this island, this house they had, which was the only house on a tiny island in the bay outside Helsinki, and which has been meticulously reproduced in various exhibitions about the Momus and about Tove Jansson's life, which I've seen around the world, including in Osaka. They had rebuilt the interior of this house based on the film which I used in the video. Anyway, yes, the first time I came to this area, as I recall, I wrote this song sitting on a doorstep. At least I wrote the lyrical idea for it. That was a good first impression, because it suggests that it's a fertile area where I can compose lugubrious songs about remembering one's sexual peccadillos of the past. So I haven't written any songs in this new place yet, but I'm sort of angling up for a 2026 Momus album. When am I not? Which at the moment it's called Mannequin with 2 Ks. I like my 2K titles, like a Gordian. I use usually sort of Germanic or Dutch kind of spellings of words which otherwise would be banal, would be ordinary, but I like to give them a kind of strange otherworldly quality by adding Ks. Also, it's a time when a lot of Ks are being added politically, so triple Ks are probably the next step. Mannequin with 3 Ks. I guess Mannequin, why did it happen? Because I was in a second-hand clothes shop just down the hill from here, which is called Relais. Very good vintage selection. And they were playing Aya Nakamura. Aya Nakamura is a black French woman who has taken a Japanese name, presumably because it sounds cooler to her. And they were playing a song of hers, what was it called again? Caption here, which had the word mannequin in the lyric. And it sounded kind of African, but also kind of, like rap, trap, whatever the young people are calling it. And it really struck me that, wow, she's singing about a mannequin, and it was like a kind of a mixture of a tirade of a criticism of a guy who is a mannequin, I imagined. This is the great thing about half-hearing songs. You can sort of imagine what they might be about and make your own falsely remembered version. It's the sort of Mondegreen principle, which I use a lot. Mishearing things, hearing things as more interesting or more relevant to yourself than they actually are. So anyway, Aya Nakamura singing about a mannequin with a kind of ambivalence in her lyric really excited me about the idea of there being an album called Mannequin with 2Ks. And I looked up the Mannequin Piss, which of course is this little statuette in Brussels where a little boy is kind of pissing in a sculpture on a street corner near the Grand Place. And of course tourists go there just to see this mannequin piss. And interestingly enough, it's, you know, world famous in the sense that you can go to Juso in Osaka, and there's an arcade which is symbolizing itself with the mannequin piss, your little painting above the arcade entrance of a pissing boy just by Juso Station. So it's appealing. It's a cute image of a child pissing freely, you know, with being uninhibited. And it kind of takes us all down to some kind of basic level of humanity. Our territorial pissings, or our kind of pleasure pissings, or the sign we've been drinking something nice and we have to piss. So that's spelt differently in Flemish. It's spelled Maneken, Mannequin. And which also reminds me of Maneki Neko, the cat which welcomes you in Asian shops into the place as a customer. Maneki Neko, always with its kind of rotating arm. And so there's a little bit of mannequin, a little bit of Maneki Neko, and of course it follows on from actor. Actor is a kind of a model in some way, a speaking model. I'm sure actors wouldn't really appreciate that definition of their trade, but they are kind of speaking models. They're chosen for how they look often, and they're exemplary in some way, not necessarily for their beauty, but maybe for some sort of personal magnetism or even some sinister quality they might have, which is scary. So I work a lot with titles. As soon as I have a title, I basically have a kind of a record, or the outline of a record. Right now I'm working through a project for my greatest patron, Robert Dye, who asked me to do 14 covers of songs by Michel Polnareff, which is an education for me because I don't really know Michel Polnareff's work. But it's a welcome opportunity to find out, you know. And we're looking to finish that by April. So I don't know, I can interpose a Momus record, I think, with this project. I've so far only done one of those 14 tracks, and that's On ira tous au paradis, We're All Going to Paradise, which is a radically inclusive song from the 60s, in which the Catholic doctrine that only good people go to paradise and the bad people burn in hell is charmingly overturned with the idea of an inclusive paradise where all the bad people also go. Everybody's going to paradise, even me. All the blessed and all the cursed will see. We will see. All the nuns and all the fucking rotters, sheep astray, the gays and the garrotters. Paradise is for everybody. You could say that destroys the idea of paradise, which is a reward for good behavior, but I think the radical inclusiveness Michel Polnareff is suggesting, that all the garrotters and the whores and people are all going to paradise as well, and even animals will be there. You would have burned for saying this, you know, a few hundred years ago. But I think it's a sign of his good intentions towards humanity, that even the worst of us, we have complications and we have saving graces, and perhaps our good qualities are all tied up with our bad qualities. This is something I keep coming up against, especially in Momus material, that our nuance and our kind of confusion and our complication is really, you know, interesting, and the dynamics of that, you can't have a sort of suburban idea of a risk-free life in which you eradicate all the scary things or the bad things. This simply ends up in boredom. This would be purgatory, I suppose, in the Catholic schema. You would have a very boring life, and you would be cutting yourself off from the source of a lot of your creativity if you cut off perceivedly evil things. So I'm always using this dynamic, using the power of appetite, even of scary appetites and things you have to control. You have to sublimate, as Freud would have said. We have to sublimate to be social animals, to get on with other people. I was reading something very interesting recently, actually, which is Erving Goffman. I didn't realize that Erving Goffman is a sociologist who came up with this great book in the 60s, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, it's called. A book about dramaturgical sociology, so it's looking at everyday life as a kind of theatre that people have to master. And he comes at the end to the conclusion that there's a kind of contradiction in human social life, which is that we learn to be very good at the theatre of presenting ourselves as moral people, ethical people. But our ethics are mostly concerned with this theatre and not with actual ethical choices and decisions. This idea that we present a theatre of ethical concerns, which kind of, to me, maps also to Freud's, the superego, the ego, and the id. The id is the naughty Mr. Hyde, the Jekyll and Hyde, another Edinburgh reference, of the human personality. And its energy is very important. It's a bit like the energy that Takashi Murakami used to talk about coming from the otaku class in Japan. There has to be some kind of energy of trashiness and of evil and of bad motives and of sexiness and, sex, death, and the concern to dominate other people, all the rest of it. It's all sort of churning away in your id. But it's not presentable. It's not respectable to present that as yourself in a social situation. So the theatre of everyday life involves editing that, censoring bits of yourself which look unacceptable. I've been watching a lot Peep Show, actually, which is a series from the noughts and the teens. It ran for, I think it's about 7 years on Channel 4. I didn't watch it at the time, but I've been catching up with it now. And it sort of, in some ways, follows on from a series I did like a lot, which was Nathan Barley, a sort of satire on hipster London in the 90s, essentially, although it came out after the turn of the century. And I could sort of recognize characters in Nathan Barley, some of which were allegedly based on me, someone told me, but because I had vaguely crossed paths with Charlie Brooker in the 90s. I think he interviewed me about Shibuya at one point for some radio program or something. So in a way, the Peep Show, which is, the point of Peep Show is that you hear the inner monologue of characters who are presenting themselves in a certain light. And the power of the comedy there is us recognizing our own bad motivations and bad thoughts and jealousies and rivalries and cupidities so clearly. In a very British way, because British comedy always seems to be it's either about embarrassment, public embarrassment, The Office is the classic example, or awfulness, the awfulness of British people, Fawlty Towers, whatever, is the power. It's the psychopathology of British people, which is the power of British comedy. And you would hear that in a more innocent form in the 60s when, things like Round the Horn, Kenneth Williams, whatever. It's very much about sexual innuendo. So this is a time when sex is looming. You've got the Chatterley trial and all the rest of it, D.H. Lawrence's book On Trial for Being Too Sexy, winning, and then the sexual liberation of the 60s with the pill coming along and consequence-free sex being the result. But then you have this kind of repression which is being burst through, and you can hear that in the audience's reaction to sexy double entendres in Kenneth Williams and people like that. So by the turn of the century, British toxicity, and there is a real toxicity in British public life. I've always thought that a lot of British television is about hate watching based on class, that you hate watch people from different classes than yourself. There is a lot of hate around, as you may have noticed in the politics of today. It's almost entirely driven by hate and not necessarily that politicians will deliver the advantages you want in your life, but that they will crucify your enemies, that they will bring pain to your enemies. And I even noticed that in urban issues around me here. Like some of the cafes here, there are basically 3 or 4 hipster cafes in this area, which are gentrifying, undoubtedly, the coffee scene anyway. And when you look at some of the bad reviews for these cafes, you see that people are complaining that they are bringing the wrong sort of people into the neighborhood, that this neighborhood has so far resisted gentrification. It's up on the top of a hill. Somehow the rest of Paris has become unaffordable, but this area, combat, it's a site of conflict and of combat, and we're combating those yuppies, those rich people down the hill. And of course it's been an area of solidarity, a left-wing area. But of course gentrification, in an expensive city, gentrification spreads to precisely this sort of area where there's still cheap accommodation, cheapish accommodation. This flat was quite reasonably priced. And people like me are going to move in and going to want better coffee. There's a very good cafe called Plural. There's a very good one called Candle Kids. There's a very good one called Mardi, all in this area. And more will undoubtedly come along. And to me, they're great because they raise the standard of coffee that one can drink in an area. But if you click on lowest ratings on the Google Maps reviews, you see a lot of people complaining, first of all, that they can't use laptops in these cafes because these cafes are not necessarily co-working spaces. But secondly, that they are pushing up the prices of coffee in the area. It's not really true because there are a lot of cheap cafes with cheap coffee as well. But one feels filtered, and also the response of the staff. The staff are described often as arrogant, ignoring people that they don't like. I'm probably the kind of customer these cafes do want, so I've just started to get ça va in my local cafe here, which is Mardi. They will say, bonjour, ça va, meaning, how's it going? We recognize you as a regular customer, we like you, blah, blah, blah. Whereas if you walk in there and you're the wrong sort of person for the kind of ambiance that the cafe wants, they give you a cold shoulder. They might ignore you at the till. They might speak gruffly to you if you start using your laptop, or do this kind of sit in the wrong area, whatever. There are certain areas designated for laptops in, for instance, Candle Kids. So these things all get noted in the bad reviews. I always find bad reviews very interesting, and often it's a little bit rude, but I sit there in cafes reading the bad reviews for the cafe in question, because they're there. They're not part of a hype culture. It's not like you only get good reviews and the cafes can delete the bad ones. What they can do is they can make snarky responses. So sometimes the people will say, oh yes, you should stay at home with your Nescafe coffee machine if you feel this way about our coffee. Or actually, some of the snarkiest people are the gay couple who run Recto Verso Cafe down in Le Marais. They always have very funny, sarcastic remarks, but they're particularly pernickety when it comes to their customers, because they don't like anyone taking social media pictures in their cafe. And that is the thing people come to certain cafes to do, is to say, hey, I'm in this cafe, here's a record of me in this cafe, I'm having fun. You go back to Korea or wherever you come from, and that is part of your memories of Paris, is that you were in this cafe and took pictures there. And if the baristas are kind of actively stopping you doing that, it makes it's a real source of conflict. So, but bad reviews they're very telling, and the responses of the cafe owners to the bad reviews are very telling as well. And there is inevitably a certain amount of filtration going on, social filtration, that you have to be the right kind of person with the right profile. Mardi, it's true, I think it's a very privileged clientele, mostly speaking English in France. And this actually is something that reproduces itself all around the world. Even when I was in Laos, there was a cafe in Vientiane run by an American woman, which attracted only English-speaking customers and had the best coffee in Vientiane that I could find anyway back in 2018. I'm sure there are more of them now because it was rapidly developing as a tourist destination even while I was there. But it's always English speakers, usually American accented English speakers, who are in there. And bringing an Australian coffee culture, essentially, third wave so-called coffee culture. So anyway, how did I take this route? I can't remember, but the mannequin is a model in the sense that when you pose for a social media photograph, you want to be your own model. You want to be a model of the self you would wish to be. Or when you're journaling in a cafe, which is a kind of modern trend that I don't really understand, and not of the generation that goes and journals. I used to keep diaries. I kept many diaries, but I don't journal in the modern sense, which is sort of self-directed motivational speech combined with mementos of your various aspirational experiences. You kind of aspire to be the self who is sitting in that cafe and who is having the very high quality coffee, which is €6 instead of €2 or whatever a coffee used to cost. And I think that's important. I think it's great that people have an aspirational sense of a self that they would like to be. The aspirations of characters on TV are different from your aspirations, and therefore you criticize them as you would criticize yourself. All that stuff. I think when I've moved to Japan or moved to America, there's always been a sense that, oh, thank God I'm escaping this toxicity. People are going to be nice here. But I think it's just what you realize over time is that there's simply a different organization of that toxicity, and that it wouldn't necessarily even be desirable to kind of cauterize and exclude the toxicity, because it is a source of creativity, a source of human energy, a source of togetherness of certain groups anyway, against other groups perhaps. You can't simply say negative stuff will be, transcended, superseded, left behind at some point. We are insecure, backbiting, backstabbing kind of creatures. Although actually the makers of Peep Show, now 20 years later, there was an interview with them in The Guardian, and they're like, this would never be commissioned now. So perhaps the moment has passed. Even the moment for revealing the toxicities, the churning kind of hostilities and insecurities in the British human breast might have passed. That's all I have to say to you today, and it's amazing what nothing actually can churn up, what it can bring out when you think you have nothing to say. See you next time.
Open University.
I dreamed a university of gentle non-perversity and very little boring how-to-do. No need to cram for no exam certificates for cheats or scams, but just a funny little video. Who asked for it, who's watching it, who's taping it and scotching it, who's chopping, hopping, hopscotch, I don't care. The ratings might be scraping it, but we are in the apple barrel at the bottom, breathing fumes for air. I dreamed that I was edgelord of the goof times, captaining your always burning airlines. 1,000 pixels dancing fair with AI eyes and AI hair, served you salty sardines and prey lines.
A choice of viewing now. On BBC Two, you can see a test transmission about the diseases spread by mosquito in sub-Saharan Africa. Meanwhile, on BBC One, we present Bob Harris and the Old Grey Whistle Test, which this week features live music from Momus, Howard Devoto, and Bell and Sebastian.